Okay, thank you everyone for coming. If you're just coming in the side doors, come on in and grab some space on the floor. There's still room up front. If people want to sit up front, that's fine. My name's Scott Reed. I'm a professor of chemistry here at CU Denver, and it's my privilege to introduce our speaker, Sir Fraser Stoddart, and also to say a few words about why it is that he's here right now. I've had the chance over the last 2 days to have numerous conversations with our speaker, not just about science and about chemistry, but another topic that's come up a lot is that of legacy. He's talked a lot about universities that he's visited and countries that he's visited, and has lots of opinions about what those institutions do well and don't do well in terms of ensuring a legacy of research and of education. And in that vein, the reason that he is here is because the generosity of a CU Denver professor who probably best exemplifies that interest in legacy, Bob Damrauer and Lenny Damrauer. Bob has shown a tremendous interest in seeing not just that he has a personal legacy, but that he has contributed to the university and the department as a whole in a way that will have a long-lasting impact, including this lectureship, but also in many other ways. So with that, I will just briefly mention that our speaker has been on the faculty at Northwestern as a Board of Trustees professor since 2008. His accolades are many, and I won't go through those, but most significantly in 2016, along with Savage and Faringa, he won the 2016 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the design and synthesis of molecular machines. So let us welcome Sir Fraser Stoddart.
Well, thank you very much, Scott, for your introduction, and let me again record my thanks to this institution, and particularly Bob here. Here's his name, Damrauer, and wife, Lenny, for their generosity and, as it were, being what is rather unique to the United States, being remarkable philanthropists and putting up the funds that allow events like this to take place. So thank you very much, both of you. And thank you for the hospitality that I've been accorded while I'm here. All right, so I'm going to talk tonight, being a public occasion, about taking a very simple so-called metal organic framework that is made primarily of carbohydrate, something called cyclodextrin, from the research laboratory to the marketplace. And I will warn you, it is pretty topical. The marketplace is looming large. It's only a week away. So let me first of all introduce the idea of complex networks, because that's going to characterize the metal organic frameworks. But before we go there, we're all familiar with the internet. We're using it every day. Some of us will be familiar with stock exchanges, if we have some money in our pockets to give up to them. And finally, you may well have seen birds in flight following a V-shaped pattern. And all of these are complex networks where prediction is now impossible, and certainly rules the roost, and the unexpected is always just lurking around the corner. The other property I want to emphasize tonight is that of emergence. And I'll illustrate it just with starting with atoms of gold, and the fact that we now can make nanoparticles of various different sizes, knowing exactly how many gold atoms are present. And this is nanotechnology that was used thousands of years ago, particularly in the big churches in Europe, these stained glass windows. So you can dial out these vibrant yellows, blues, greens, reds, just as a result of the size of these nanoparticles. And that's what the artisans were doing, as I say, thousands of years ago. So in some ways, nanotechnology is not as new as we think it is. Now, just a quick history of those things called cyclodextrins. This is a boring list, so I put up some of the players, and at this present time, as far as I know, there's only one that is still with us, Wolfram Sanger. So the whole story began in 1891, so it's well over a century old. Two people I want to mention. First of all, Myron Bender, because this was my cyclodextrin Bible. You can see it's well worn for many years. And also Myron Bender was, for many, many years, a member of the faculty of chemistry at Northwestern University. We never overlapped, and I don't think we ever met. The other person I want to mention is Friedrich Kramer. And I do so because there's a little story about the fact that his early work on cyclodextrins was to show that you could put things inside what are bucket-shaped or donut-shaped molecules. And you will see that, as is common with people who strike out, often when they're young, into a new pasture, they're not always welcomed by the older people in the field. And I remember I heard him give this speech at 1978 in Munich. And the point was that he had left the field of what became known as host-guest chemistry, to use the words of the late Don Cram at UCLA, or supramolecular chemistry, to use the words of Jean-Marie Lane, who in Strasbourg has just turned 80 years of age. And it was a field that was sparked off by Charles Pedersen, and it was these three people that shared the 1987 Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1967. And in that same year, Kramer left the field using cyclodextrins, having demonstrated almost every single principle that was then demonstrated using the unnatural so-called crown ethers that Pedersen invented. So here is what he had to say on that night in Munich. When I presented my results for the first time at a meeting in Lindau, Lake Constance, in 1947, I met fierce opposition from some parts of the establishment. One of my older and very important colleagues even stated publicly and bluntly in this discussion that he would try to remove a young man with such crazy ideas from the academic scene. But there were also a good number of supporters, so I finally made it. And you can imagine when he gave this little speech, people just got up and cheered. So these were two giants. Now we're back with the chemistry. So the cyclodextrins are made from starch, which of course is present in potatoes, or maize, which I don't know if it reaches Denver in any amounts, but if you're in Iowa and places like that, there are large amounts of maize. Rice, of course, peas, beans, whatever. And so there's a microorganism with a couple of enzymes that chops the long chain polysaccharide called amylose into bits, 6, 7, 8, commonly in size, and then stitches them together. And the one I'm going to talk about tonight is gamma cyclodextrin with 8 sugars. And as I say, they're often depicted as being bucket-shaped or donut-shaped. So here it is in all its glory. As I say, obtained from amylose microbiologically. But what is important tonight in relation to what I'm going to show you is it has 8-fold symmetry. There are 8 glucose units, and you can move them around and put them on top of each other, which commutes with 4-fold symmetry. And this is what is ultimately going to be important. All right, so these are representations from the solid-state X-ray crystal structures, a ball and stick model, and a so-called space-filling model. And this is a wonderful story of serendipity. So Ron Smaldone had joined my group about 2009 at Northwestern, and one day he decided, early 2010, that he would try to make a construct known as the Borromean rings. So this is a very, as it were, exotic thing to be doing. It's chemical topology, and there are about a dozen ways you can put three rings together. You can have them interlocked 1, 2, 3, or you can have this situation, and I don't have free hands, but you can put two rings together like this, and then where you see space, if you can see it, you can put a third ring through, and that locks these two rings in place. But in reverse, if any one ring, and we'll take this mystical ring that I can't show you, and you break it, the other two can fall apart like that. And it's, without going into the history, comes from the Borromeo family in Tuscany back in the 1500s. All right, so this is what we had made this construct, this topology, while I was at UCLA in 2004. It was published in Science using the same chemical constitution for the three rings. What Ron wanted to do was to have three different rings. So he had gamma cyclodextrin presented to him on a plate from nature, and he had good reason to believe that he could take two linear molecules. They're called azobenzene, this is the azo part, dicarboxylate. And the two of them would sit in, and you'll notice it was the counter ion potassium. And he got crystals, and if you're a chemist and you get crystals, you're always quite excited. But in fact, I now know that they languished around in the lab for several months before they were sent across the pond to St Andrews, because we happened to have a joint collaboration funded by the NSF and its equivalent in the UK to this wizard of a crystallographer, and lo and behold, we got the surprise of our life. It was, at the very basic level, a cube that is made up of 6 cyclodextrins, and they're linked together by the potassium ions. And as Alex Sloman pointed out in a very cryptic email, I see the cyclodextrin, I see 4 atoms weight potassium, I see water but no other guest molecule. So the organic had just kind of disappeared as far as the X-rays were concerned, presumably highly disordered. And so we were visited by serendipity, but it didn't stop at just making a cube. These cubes all joined together with other potassium ions and formed what is called a metal organic framework. Now, I could be quite boastful here. This is the one and only of the thousands of metal organic frameworks that have been made in the last, say, 15 to 20 years that is green, environmentally friendly, and actually edible. Because it's very simple. It is made up of a spoonful of sugar, a pinch of salt, and a swig of alcohol. Okay, well, it's not the alcohol we drink, it's methanol, but you can replace the methanol with ethanol, as I'll show you in a minute. And so you get this extended framework, and it's not just potassium, it will happen possibly with sodium, not very easy to do it there, rubidium and cesium. But we're only going to be interested in the potassium one tonight. And the outcome is that. And in British parlance, because I come from Scotland, we say, Bob's your uncle. Americans really don't know this phrase, but if you come from other parts of the world, Commonwealth countries, you know it. I'm sure Angus knows it. Bob's your uncle. It just in American parlance says, you've got it. Okay, so we've got it. And there are the crystals, and they can grow up to a cubic centimeter. Amazing. And this chemistry has been published in the Journal of the Chemical Education, and it was an ex-student who's now at Wesleyan University who put the article together. His undergraduate students, and you might want to consider this here, can do this experiment easily in 1 week in the laboratory, and he also published with a high school teacher where the high school students are also making this particular metal organic framework. For the aficionados in the audience, the purple ball is the potassium ion, and in the north and the south direction, there are the glucose units that are part of this 8-sugar ring that are on the so-called primary face. This is this one here, that are coordinated to the primary hydroxyl and the so-called ring oxygen atom of the sugar. And they hold the 6 cyclodextrins together. We call this the gamma CD6 cubes. And then on the secondary face, in the east-west direction here, there are other potassium ions that link all the cubes together until you've got this incredibly big 3-dimensional structure of porosity, as you'll see in a minute, that is very high. So here's just a glimpse of the cube again. Inside here, there is a spherical cavity just under 2 nanometers in diameter, so it's absolutely perfect for putting small molecules in, including small drugs. Here's a color version of it. And very often in this field, you describe the actual metal organic framework as having a huge amount of surface area inside. There it would be in meters, square meters per gram, but probably better for me to say if we had a kilogram, it would cover 200 football fields. So there's an enormous amount of surface area inside these crystals. If we slice one of the cubes in the middle and rotate it, there's the cyclodextrin. So you see a cylindrical cavity that goes all the way through the crystal. These are cylindrical channels. Let me play it again so that I can show you there are also triangular channels. And we'll come back to these in a minute. And one unit cell, as it's called in crystallography, is 3 times 3 times 3 nanometers square. And for the aficionados, this tells you that it's a very well-resolved crystal structure. And this is not the potassium one, it is actually the one with rubidium. But for this audience, the emptiness is even over half the space occupied by the cubic crystals, 54%. And so these images, you've seen this one already. And what I want to do here is to say that these channels run down the so-called ABC axis in the crystal and are just under 1 nanometer in diameter that communicate between the spheres. And there are the spheres, these turquoise balls, and the green and the purple here represent the cylindrical channels and the triangular ones respectively, and the triangular ones are just under half a nanometer along the so-called 111 plane. All right, so let's see. Just one application that could become extremely important. We are now so anxious at the rising levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that here is a very cheap metal organic framework that soaks up carbon dioxide. And so if you present carbon dioxide to it, boom, it goes in very quickly. And this is associated with what we call chemisorption. And then slower uptake is physisorption. And I'll explain that now in terms of what you see here. The chemisorption is associated with the formation, here is the CO2, forming what's called a carbonic acid on this primary hydroxyl group. Every one that is spare. And in each cube, on each cyclodextrin, there are 4 of these that are ready to take on CO2. And then on top of that, there will be less ordered carbon dioxide taken up physically. And so Jeremiah Gassam-Smith, he showed using carbon-13 NMR spectroscopy that this peak belongs to the carbon atom up here of the so-called carbonic acid. But he did another experiment that I think is really quite remarkable because it is so simple and so easy to understand, and you could do it in a high school. He took a Commoner-Gardner indicator, which is a compound that changes its color as it goes from being neutral to being acidic, methyl red, and he laced the crystals as he grew them, the cubes, with this indicator. And then he simply brought up some solid CO2, took the lid off the Petri dish, and in 5 minutes he had an orange color, reflecting the fact that the indicator was seeing the acidity of this proton sitting here. And if he took the CO2 away, in 5 minutes, it went back essentially to there. And so this is very much a soaker up of CO2 in a reversible way, and it is what the chemists call, going back to, I think, the 19th century, the Le Chatelier principle. Very, very highly reversible. So I'm going to be talking about a first application of these green cyclodextrin MOFs today, but we see this as only a stepping ground to perhaps using it in the front end of mopping up CO2 from the atmosphere. My dream is that one day we might be able to go to a place like Target and get a little contraption that we can take home. We can put it in our balcony or in the yard, and it would be driven by solar energy ideally, and it would be mopping up CO2 from the atmosphere. And if everybody was doing that, we might make a difference to the change in the climate. All right, so I talked about emergence in terms of gold. The story comes back to emergence here because all I've been telling you is the CO2 uptake and other things I'm going to tell you does not happen with gamma-cyclodextrin on its own. It's only when it's in this CD-MOF, metal organic framework extended structure. So my analogy is if the glucose molecules that make the cyclodextrin are the bricks, and the actual gamma-cyclodextrins are the walls, and the cubes could be likened to a house, and then the extended structure to a hotel. Then, of course, the potassium ions all along here are acting as the cement to allow the construct to happen. A hotel is not a collection of houses, and a house is more than just walls, and a wall needs more than just bricks. So, again, it's a very elegant example of this phenomenon of emergence. So, Ron, having made this serendipitous discovery, could not be prevented from getting hold of some food-grade gamma-cyclodextrin from the Wacker Chemical Company. There it is. And, of course, he had to change methanol for ethanol, and so this meant that he had to go to a CVS and obtain some Everclear, and at the same time he picked up some food preservative as a sort of potassium benzoate. And he made this in his kitchen, and he had it for breakfast. Now everybody's saying, what did it taste like? Very bland, but if I can sort of whet your appetite by saying you could put anything you want inside as a source of some taste, fragrance, mint, something like that. So you could have any taste you like. Okay, so the CD-MOF was, of course, made in his kitchen entirely of food-grade materials. And so we have a food-grade solution to this very fast-growing area of metal organic framework chemistry. And so when we published the finding in Angewandte Chemie, the German journal, Jeremiah Gassensmith prepared this recipe, and we actually had a New York restaurateur use it one evening in his food preparation. But that aside, the conclusion is that we have developed a porous material that is safe. It passes all these hurdles. It is inexpensive, and as you've seen, it's easily made in one fell swoop. And so, what could it be useful for? Well, here I list food, of course, preventing spoilage, alerts. It could be used for timed release of various preservatives or agents that are in the food. For personal care, toothpaste, deodorants, home care in air fresheners and so on. And here I extended even further. So personal care, home care, food, the pharmaceutical industry, of course, beckons new drug delivery systems and even the petrochemical industry. And this is the one that we actually zeroed in to commercialize. And so in 2013, a company called Panacea Nano was registered in Delaware. Before we go there, I'm now the CTO, Chief Technical Officer of this company, and the absolute wizard who gets all the credit for what's happening is Yusri Butros. He's a CEO, Chief Executive Officer of the company, and originally from Egypt, a graduate from the University of Michigan in electrical engineering, and then spent 16 years at Intel, and also from MIT, this younger man who also came from Intel. We'll come back to them in a minute. So the serendipitous discovery was in 2010. Intellectual property was filed in 2011. There was feasibility studied for various different possible applications in 2012. The company was registered in March of 2013 in Delaware. A business plan was drawn up in 2014. Funding was raised in 2015. The operations that were geared toward producing the CD-MOF on a large scale, a kilogram scale, started in 2016. And by 2017, and now I'll let the cat out the bag, a first range of cosmetics, free particular skincare products, were released online onto the market. And this, prototypes were produced. It was the end of 2017 that the online store opened. And they sold like hotcakes through the online. So there had to be a license agreement drawn up with a marketing company, which I'm going to talk about next. This was when the Nobel Prize came on the scene. And the relaunch of the online products, which were withdrawn in May of this year, is going to happen a week today in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And, well, they're going to be, this event is going to be, to some extent, comparable with that one. So just a little bit more about Yusri. As I said, from Michigan, he got his PhD, and that's what he was doing at Intel. And after 16 years, he courageously resigned to be the CEO of the company. Again, Benji, PhD from MIT. This was he was doing at Intel, and he had 8 years at Intel before he resigned. Okay, so the product has got high recognition locally in Chicago. Chicago is one of these places where there is a organization that every year looks at companies, hundreds of companies from all over the United States, and awards so-called innovation awards. And we were fortunate enough last year, on the 29th of October, 2018, and I wasn't at this ceremony, I was somewhere else in the world, to get an award for a startup company as it was at that time. And I can tell you off the record that around the same date, I think it's 28th of October, 2019, we're getting the top award for a very successful company that's gone in a year from a startup company to possibly a multi-million-dollar company. So these are the free products that were being marketed online, so-called anti-wrinkle repair night cream, skin rejuvenation serum, and anti-aging eye cream. And I've got to say at this stage, all the credit for this choice of commercialization goes to Yusri Butros. And you could have knocked me over with a feather when he broke the news that we were going to be starting our exploit into commercialization with cosmetics. All credit to him. And so what is going on here is, if you're a conventional cosmetic, then all the action is occurring very quickly from the so-called additives. But in the case of the CD-MOF, these cubes are releasing very slowly the additives, and you might have seen them coming out. Let me replay this if I can. Yeah, you see them? Coming out and going into the skin. And so on a graph, conventional cosmetic would be following this blue dashed line. The ones based on CD MOFs would be following this solid line. Now, as you go into production, they like to change the name, and so Panacea Nano doesn't call them CD MOFs, it calls them organo nanocubes. And these organo nanocubes give better performance as far as cosmetics are concerned, controlled delivery, tunable release, and absolutely no irritation. And so they've been tested, the skincare products, with over 100 participants in any one time, given one of the 8 skincare products. So now we're moving into another era where there are going to be 8, 4 for younger people and 4 for older people, over a 12-week period. And all of these participants responding to a questionnaire, over 95% were impressed and said, yes, we would buy them. There are photographs and videos showing significant improvements after 4 weeks in people's skin. And the test in total covered many different ethnicities, health conditions, and skin natures and colors. And all the participants, which totaled over 500, there was no single case of skin irritation reported. So commercialization going forward is actually, I find, quite mind-boggling. Lucy and I were on a visit to the United Arab Emirates, and we met a very wealthy Jordanian. And so what he, having made his money out of, I believe, transporting automobiles around the world, wanted to enter a new area of business. And so very quickly he formed a joint venture with Panacea Nano, saying that he's going to invest $300 million over the next 3 years on branding, marketing, and licensing. And his team of about 35 people now have contracted a number of top world celebrities to be brand ambassadors, contracted a top dermatologist from New York to be a brand advocate. They're planning this huge event, which, as I've said, is next Tuesday in New York City. And there will be 8 products, 4 and 4 for older and younger people. And so they've been furiously signing agreements with the very top retailers in the cosmetic industry in top cities all around the world. So just the final line here, third-party clinical studies show over 95% efficacy for all the products. I now think I've got a little bit of music that will just summarize what I've been talking about. So here we go. Right.
the work that's being done here is going to result in progress, some of which we can't anticipate yet, but will lead to new products, new materials, new technologies. They are delving into the deepest aspects of matter. They are exploring our ability to manipulate molecules.
Okay, right, so just let me summarize. By serendipitous by a serendipitous act, we stumbled across this really one and only green, environmentally friendly, edible metal organic framework. I told you about this wonderful property of being able to soak up CO2. We've had a good fill of the company that's been launched, Panacea Nano. And of course, at an academic level, there's been quite a lot of publications starting in 2010. And particularly the first publication got a huge amount of attention from the world press, including the New York Times and many of these magazines around the world. All right, so here are the key players. This is the man, Ron Smaldone, who made the serendipitous discovery. He had come from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, with his PhD, and of course had a very successful time at Northwestern. And for the last, 7 years, he's been at the University of Texas in Dallas, and I think he's just been promoted recently to a full professor. He was joined a year later by Jeremiah, who had started at Notre Dame University and with his PhD, and again spent a good deal of time with us at Northwestern before going to the University of Texas at Dallas as well in 2013. And then the third player was Scott Ross Forgan, also an Edinburgh graduate like myself. He, after his 4-year period at Northwestern, went back to Scotland, and we went to the University of Glasgow, where he was just recently this summer promoted to being a professor at a very young age. All very, very creative and now successful young scientists in their own right. Now, I just want to end because I will use these quotes next Tuesday. I came across them thanks to my assistant, and they're from obviously someone we should all respect and know, President John F. Kennedy. And this was on the occasion, and you'll see it'll be the 22nd of October, 2019, when I will be talking about this next Tuesday, when the National Academy of Sciences was celebrating its centenary. And of course, he was there to help them celebration and made a speech that has many memorable lines in it. So let's start off with this one. Science is the most powerful means we have for the unification of knowledge, and a main obligation of its future must be to deal with problems which cut across boundaries. whether boundaries between the sciences, between nations, or boundaries between man's scientific and his humane concern. Another one. The ocean, the atmosphere, outer space belong not to one nation or one ideology, but to all mankind. And as science carries out its tasks in the years ahead, it must enlist all its own disciples, disciplines, all nations prepared for the scientific quest, and all men capable of sympathizing with the scientific impulse. And then on the importance of pure science, fundamental science, we realize now that progress in technology depends on the progress in theory. That the most abstract investigations can lead to the most concrete results, and that the vitality of a scientific community springs from its passion to answer science's most fundamental questions. Finally, on the international nature of science, here is what he had to say. The great scientific challenges transcend national frontiers and national prejudices. The language of science has always been universal, and perhaps scientists have been the most international of all professions in their outlook. But the contemporary revolution in transport and communications has dramatically contributed to the internationalization of science. And one consequence has been the increase in organized international cooperation. So I leave you with these thoughts from the late JFK, and I finish up by thanking you all for inviting me to come here. I hope the interactions I've had with the students and faculty have been very worthwhile. They've certainly been very satisfying to me. And thank you all for your warm hospitality. Thank you.
We have time for questions, so I'd encourage, especially any students that might have questions about the science or beyond the science.
Oh, plenty of questions, yeah. Wow. We're going to mic. Why don't you ask and I will repeat it?
You mentioned the importance of legacy in science, and I was just wondering what type of legacy you wanted to leave in science and research.
So what type of legacy do I want to leave? I've said over and over again that despite the fact that I'm a Nobel laureate, what is more important to me is the legacy of leaving 500 graduate students and postdocs from 50 different countries, many of whom, over 100, have gone on to be professors in their own right. Many have gone into industry to be leaders in that arena. Some have gone into government and even a few into publishing. And that will be my legacy. People rather than prizes. Thank you.
So one of
Wow.
one of the things you talked about is that the gamma cyclidation is edible. So then why not bring it to the, why not help fight world hunger with it? Why not bring this to a governmental policy area? Because we talked about the anti-aging thing that's going on, but why not use it to fight world hunger?
Well, that's already in place. I mean, supplies of starch the world over, from maize in, I guess, this part of the world, to rice in Asia, to potatoes in my country. That is all part of it. I don't know that you would want to, go through the whole process of producing CD muffs in order to feed people who are hungry in Africa. It's a question of getting supplies of rice and potatoes and maize and things like that to these countries. I mean, I totally agree with you, but I don't think CD muffs is the way to go forward. Wow. So, yeah.
Well,
Well, here, okay. Yeah.
Thank you again for being here. My question is, at the beginning of your research, did you know or did you have the goal to go to market with your organic framework, your metal organic framework? Did you know you were going to go to market? Was that the goal? And did you see yourself ending up in the skincare field?
No, all the time. And so all of this is in the late part of my career. This discovery is made when, I'm on the borders of being 70 years of age. And so, I've gone through most of my academic life being very much the pure academic, not thinking of startup companies. But when this discovery came on this scene, I think I and many others around me thought, whoa, this is an opportunity to go into many different fields. And as I say, I didn't think of the cosmetics. And the reason, of course, that the CEO has thought of cosmetics is this is the one area where there'll be huge value added and where large profits can be made. And the main reason for doing that is that we want to address things like carbon capture and so on and so forth, which will be very much more difficult. All right, so we were very quick after the discovery to see a glimmer of a startup company, but the actual commercialization at the level it is, that was a bit of a shock to me that, somebody was ready to stake their future, a very, very rich person, on entering this highly competitive market. I mean, there's a huge number of companies all around the world, a lot of them concentrated in France, of course, who are leaders in the field. So we have a huge, stiff opposition in going into the area. Yeah. All right.
So what I was wondering is, you mentioned that your dream would be to have something like this where you could pick it up at Target and it would absorb CO2 just from your backyard, and if everyone did it collectively,
well, this
could
is a kind of stupid dream I have. But,
right.
Let me just say, I think that is a more realistic way towards actually addressing climate change by either planting many, many more trees. That's something we could do.
Right.
Certainly not burning them down. But it's something that we could hand the responsibility back to the individual or the individual family instead of leaving it with the politicians who seem to not be able to agree on whether there is even a problem. Yeah? Okay, go on.
Is that, so you're saying it's more of like an idea that will take place after sort of the cosmetic market has gained enough profits that you guys can work on something like that? I think it's one we would like to explore. Okay. And I don't think it's going to be easy. It's not something that's drawn up currently. It's something that you guys are hoping to explore in the future.
It's going to require a lot of research. It's
right.
going to require a big team of people. Right. I don't pretend that it's going to be easy. No.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So you were saying that you did not believe it would originally go commercially straight to cosmetics as the first way to go commercially. Originally, where did you think it was going to go out of any of those markets?
Well, I guess I thought of drug discovery because we had been involved in that area when I was at UCLA with silica nanoparticles coated with our molecular machines called retaxanes. So, I was sort of thinking in that direction. But, the CEO, I think, outstripped me by saying, no, that's too difficult. Let's go and do something that's going to be much easier and much more lucrative at the end of the day, to be very honest. Yep.
Do you believe these nanocubes could be used as a sort of targeted therapy for certain cancers or other diseases?
Everybody wants to look for a cure from cancer, and I will confide in you that I lost my own wife after 12 years battling against breast cancer. That was a third of our married life and a fifth of her life, so I've been there and I've watched it. And I don't know that it was so much the cancer that killed us as the hard drugs that she had to take that increasingly got harder, and there were cocktails of them, 2s and 3s and 4s eventually, and of course they just ripped their body apart. So insofar as the cubes could help to reduce the amount of any of these anti-cancer drugs that are administered at the moment, yes, there is some hope. I also think, although I didn't talk about it tonight, our invention of little molecular machines could play a part in the attack on cancer, because now we have molecules with moving parts that can cross membranes in a way that the more, in quotation marks, static molecules can't. So yes, there's hope, but I still feel that the battle against cancer is a difficult one because every patient is different. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here. I know you already mentioned your skincare products and possibly like the idea of creating something to help the environment. Do you have any ideas or any other further development for any other products?
Okay, well, I think at the simple level, the CEO is talking about introducing them then to stimulants, which would be very much in the wake of the cosmetics, and also into perfumes. I think these could be quick, low-hanging fruit, but the much higher-hanging fruit are the drug delivery systems and the carbon capture, and maybe others that we haven't thought of. Yep. Yep.
Thanks for being here tonight again. I know you mentioned that there are applications in home care and cleaning products. Can you please go into that a little bit more?
Well, actually, cyclodextrins are used as just the bare cyclodextrins in Febreze, is that what it's called? You know, that you put in your dryer when you're drying your clothes and they come out more fluffy. I guess we haven't thought very much about potential applications in that area. I would have to leave it in the hands of the wizards at Panacea Nano to identify something that would be a step ahead of what is being used at the moment that is cyclodextrin based. But remember, the moths are an emergent vehicle. They can do more. And so something in home care that needs a delayed response, that needs to happen over a period of time. Yep. Okay.
Yes, sir. I was wondering, have you looked into right here in the back?
Okay.
So I was wondering if you looked into long-term storage of proteins for, say, space travel or anything up in space.
Looked into?
Say it again?
You have to say it again. You lost me.
I was wondering if you've looked into storing proteins within this space station or anything like that.
Okay, good question. There we would be scuppered by the fact that the cavities are really too small to take even the small proteins. So we really are limited to small molecules, and proteins are just too large to find a home. Having said that, a modification of our cubes could maybe end up creating larger cavities because that would be between cubes. And of course, the chemist, the engineer of matter, the sculptor of matter, anything is possible. So I wouldn't rule it out, but it's not, again, a low-hanging fruit. Yep.
First of all, thank you very much for coming here. And my question was, I can imagine your journey being very difficult throughout everything. So my question is what drove you the most during your hardest obstacles throughout this journey?
Well, thank you for asking. I had a fairly tough time at the beginning of an academic career in a hierarchical system where the senior people did not support the young people. And it was so much of a nightmare that I actually left the University of Sheffield after 8 years and went to a company, to the Imperial Chemical Industries corporate laboratory near Liverpool. And there it was sheer magic. There were none of the political battles that I had witnessed in the chemistry department at Sheffield. There were young people, they just wanted to get on and do things. And so I got into a very highly collaborative vein with some of these young people, and out of it emerged the fact that ICI were marketing worldwide wipeout weed killers, and they were used commercially on potato greens in places like Idaho before the harvesting equipment was brought in, so-called bipyridinium herbicides named diquat and paraquat. And eventually, before I left ICI, we had complex diquat with a crown ether that Pedersen had given to the world, and shortly afterwards, we complex paraquat, also is known as metabiologen, with bisparaphenoline 34 crown 10, which was a crown ether that Don Cram had given to the world. And then that just opened up the way to our molecular shuttles, molecular switches, and ultimately our molecular machines. So out of something that was really very unpleasant, there came a gift that without it, I probably wouldn't be standing here with the background I have. So life, you can never really map out where it's going to take you. But the one bit of advice I would give to people is if you're having a tough time, and it's not that you can do much about it because it's the people around you that's making it difficult, don't suffer it forever and ever. Do something. Either escape for a while or confront it. I escaped, and then when I came back, I confronted it. I wrote to the major newspapers in the United Kingdom, and I was very critical of the behavior of the senior people, and I became probably, for a period, the most hated chemist in the whole country. But I survived.
Hi, thanks for being here. I wanted to ask about what strategies did you use throughout your career in working with people from so many different countries and having really an international career, and what benefits did you gain from working with so many?
Well, the diversity, of course, was the answer to my early success. And I'll be very blunt, and I will be so because I see the old country where I come from actually going back in history. And there was a period in the 80s where things were not working in the UK, given Brits only. They were not really passionate, they weren't really applying themselves, they weren't working hard, they were just working short hours. They would appear at 10, 9:30 in the morning, 10 they would go for coffee. That would go on until 11, and then an hour, and then we would go and have a long lunch break, and then a tea break in the afternoon, and then go home, and very little was happening. I brought in students, and this was interesting, against the feelings of the senior professors from Italy, Spain, and then France and Germany, and it was a game changer. You did not come from Messina in Italy to a cold place like Sheffield in the middle of England that had much snow to play around. You came to work, and you didn't want to participate in all this socializing. And so they were the people who discovered the first catenane, or made the first catenane, made the first molecular shuttle. And so I always look upon that as the diversity that, first of all, came from bringing in other Europeans and then people from the US and Japan and so on, was a total game changer while I was still in the UK. And the tragedy is that they're now closing it down and sending these people out. They are absolute lunatics. I call them the nincompoops, and that means they're very, very stupid. And if you come from Scotland, you go even further and say that the person who's heading all this up is a glaikit numpty, which means that he is super, super stupid, and both the adjective and the noun tell you that. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming. Are you working on any further academic research at this time, or do you have plans to in the future?
Okay, so I am 90% of my time on the road. Before coming here, I was for a 2-week period up in Calgary in Canada for 2 or 3 days, then in Puebla in Mexico for 2 or 3 days, and then in Japan in Tsukuba and Kyoto for 2 or 3 days, and then in Wuhan in China, all in 2 weeks. And that's the story of my life. Next week, I'm in New York. A week after that, I'm visiting Yale. Then I have to have a period off because the one thing that's fallen foul of all this travel are my teeth. So I need to have some root canals, which I'm not looking forward to. And I'm going to go to my daughter's dentist in Belmont in Massachusetts and Boston for that wonderful experience. And then after that, we have, let's see, Japan, Taiwan, Malta, and Australia before the end of the year. Okay? Last year, it was 365 air miles. 365,000 air miles. Okay? So we'll probably better that this year. Okay. Oh.
Hi, thank you for coming. Is the product between CDMOF and CO2 also environmentally friendly, just like CDMOF is by itself, or does it have different properties?
Yeah, I think it's all environmentally friendly, although it is probably going to be a staged device or material that is going to do the job if it's ever going to be possible. I think CDMOFs could be at the front end, just bringing the CO2 out of the atmosphere where it's something like 400 parts per million. That's not a lot. Of course, it's on the increase, which is bad, but you need something to deal with a very small amount in the air. And maybe the CDMOFs is a starting point, but then it'll have to be handed on to other sequestrants to be processed down the line to actually get the CO2 out. There's a lot of research that needs to be done. So it's just a glint in my eye.
We'll take one final question, although it pains me to not give everybody the chance. We have a weekly seminar series on Fridays. If you didn't get to ask a question, you can come to our regular chemistry seminar series and ask a question then.
When did your initial interest in research start? And how did you know you wanted to have a career in research?
Okay, so the story I tell is I was a junior in American parlance, so it was 1963. I was 21. And a member of the faculty of the Department of Chemistry at Edinburgh was introducing a course on quantitative analytical chemistry. And he had about 150 of us in a lecture theatre, and to, I think, put fear in us, he said, "You will be pipetting with your open mouth enough cyanide to kill the whole of Edinburgh, roughly the whole of Denver." And so we were quaking. And then he got a bit arrogant. He said, "Oh, I devised this course 10 years ago." Obviously a quick calculation, 1,500 students had taken it. It's a 10-week course. Nobody's ever finished it. And so I said at that point, "I'm going to take you on. I will finish it." I finished it in 7 weeks. So I was brought up in a farm. And on a farm in those days, you had to, many times of the year, to be doing 10 different things in a day. All right? So it's multitasking. And so I multitasked. Instead of doing one experiment at once, I looked at them and I did 2 or 3 at once, maybe 4. I was out in 7 weeks. And I got called to the high office of the professor of organic chemistry, and he offered me a stipend to go into a research laboratory for the summer. And I was only days in there when I knew that's what I wanted to do. I was bitten by the bug. It wasn't just that I liked it, I was addicted. I could only say I wanted to get back as early as possible in the morning, and I was loath to leave in the evening. And that has stayed with me. Okay?
All right, well, let's thank our speaker again very much.
Thank you all.